when you have sex at different times during your cycle,
oh yeah,
I will literally tell Chase, like, it feels like you're hitting my heart. Like,
not a bad problem to have over here.
and sometimes it's, sometimes you feel that more than others. It's because literally my cervix is lower or higher, based on where I'm at in my cycle.
The cervix is really fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
It changes position. It creates and changes this mucus. It's
cool.
Really elegant what this thing does. And it's a primary nexus of a bunch of nerve endings that contribute to the overall sexual experience of conceiving. If you do get a semen analysis that's off and you're like, I'm doing everything right, you might want to consider peeling back on the sauna. And if you don't have all the micronutrients, you might have plenty of sperm, but they're just kind of not doing what sperm need to do, which is swim the equivalent by body length from LA to San Francisco. So they need time. They need to be endurance athletes.
Welcome back to the Medicine Podcast. You guys know me. It's Mimi, and I have my husband next to me.
God.
Congratulations.
Coming in hot with the H word. This is the first time I've gotten to say that on the Medicine again. Remarried, reunionized. Here we are talking to one of our best buds.
Welcome back to the Medicine Podcast. We are so honored to have one of our best friends in the entire world back on the show, Dr. Nathan Riley. Welcome back, my friend.
I'm here. It's good to be with you guys. I do appreciate it. And I by the way, I had said that we only have like an hour and 15, but I just realized it's actually an hour and 45. So
beautiful.
I know we have a lot to cover. This is going to be a fun conversation for me, and to be like supporting you guys kind of seeing you as clients for this conversation around fertility. Like you get to actually see what I do, which is for me is like really, really nice. So let's rock and roll. Let's talk about it.
I love it. Well, let's get right into it. Everyone knows by now, if this is their first time listening to the Medicine, okay, they might not know that you're a holistic OBGYN, that you were trained classically and kind of left the system to start your own practice and to help people in the way that you saw was fit, was necessary, and how people really deserve to be treated by a medical professional. But is there anything else that you want to add to that? Obviously, we have a lot to talk about today, but our listeners know you. You've been on multiple times. You're one of our buds. But is there anything else that you want to add to just give context to like the conversation moving forward today about who you are in the world and your credentials and why you are fit to even talk about this?
Yeah, you mentioned the whole private practice thing. I want to just, I want people to appreciate that, the big question is always like, why don't more doctors do it like this? Well, there's a whole bunch of disincentives to being in your own practice. You don't have the overhead. You don't have your overhead covered, let's say, by an administrative panel or bean counters, and you don't have somebody who's doing all the billing and coding, and you're not working with insurance companies. So in some regards, the experience that men and women are experiencing with their OBGYNs, who oftentimes will shuttle you to infertility docs, what are called the reproductive endocrinologists, the reason that you're experiencing it like that is because not a lot of doctors are incentivized to do things differently. And so for me, the reason that I do everything differently is because I didn't really like that. I didn't really like being kind of put into a box of here's the protocol, here's how it is done, because we were missing a lot of things. And of course, now that I'm out and I can spend many, many hours with people, you start to like really sort of unpack a lot of the preconceived notions that we have around fertility that I was even taught, and a lot of things I wasn't taught in 15 years of school. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is kind of like the REI experience and a host of other things, because I don't think that path is bad for people. But what I will say is if you end up at the REI doctor and they're pointing you towards IVF, the value of getting a lot of this stuff that we're going to talk about dialed in is just as important, because IVF is an independent risk factor for a variety of pregnancy complications. So the reason for that might be that the whole process is poisoning the body, maybe. But more importantly, what was going on upstream that led to this issue in the first place? Mm-hmm. And so for anybody out there listening, this is for you. And this is actually a matter of just getting a woman and a man's health in order, using a metric of sperm count and quality and the menstrual cycle as our guide, as a vital sign in and of itself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh man, so awesome. We grew up, kids of the 90s, we grew up in a Christian environment, and all I ever heard was don't get pregnant. So I spent formative years and even up to my, 30 years of age, like, don't get pregnant, dude. Don't get pregnant. Don't get pregnant, whatever you do. And that's the story, my internal dialogue. And I've been somewhat of a condom Nazi, if you will, because that programming lives ferociously inside of me. And as we've come upon this time in our life that we're now just so excited to, intentionally and consciously be leaning into fertility, it is a switch. And then the world now, all we hear in the, holistic health space is like, oh my God, fertility is something that is becoming more and more unique and rare. And this infertility problem is actually starting to bleed into like every lane of life. And so it's a little bit of like a holy shit, I might need to like get myself together and reestablish a relationship with fertility that for, up to this point in my life had been something that I kept arm's length.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, that's the experience for most people in the United States. We are a very, very Christian-backed sort of nation. It's in the very fabric of our society. A lot of us feel shame or guilt around our sexuality. And I'm not even talking about the homosexuals. I mean, heterosexuals feel bad about wanting sex. Right. And so at 15, we're told, don't get pregnant. For the love of God, Mimi, don't walk around an erect penis because you're going to have a baby inside of you.
Like it could just happen like that,
Yeah. Like it, it's, I mean, it is magic, but there has to be like contact. I mean, it's not going to be immaculate necessarily. I'm not going to say it never. I'm just saying, for the Christians out there, what I am saying is that the sex education was really that we all received as early as like middle school, maybe 5th or 6th grade, was don't have sex because a myriad of bad things will happen to you. So we have become imprinted with this notion that this is the worst possible thing that could happen, especially to a young lady's body. And for the men, if you get a person pregnant, your life is going to be very, very hard, and you're going to have to either abandon them or you're going to convince them to terminate. Like all this weird stuff is what we were taught. Like that's what we were thinking around. So I didn't have sex until 18, but I had met my current partner at 15, and we had sex when I was 18. She was 17. Technically, that's statutory rape, but we're not going to go there, right?
It was the same with Chase and I, except I was older. So I don't know if it's the same. If I'm making a joke, but
poor Chase, yeah. Poor Chase had a cougar after him, yeah. So that's maybe like I'm not joking about like this sort of age thing, but what I am saying is that we had 3 years where we were actually probably compelled by that education to not connect in that way. And so fast forward, you want to get pregnant, you take out the goalie or you stop taking birth control. And now suddenly that penis inside of you is going to make a baby. That's what you were taught. Right. And it isn't just isn't that simple. So the good news is nature has worked this out for us. You're not supposed to have a baby every single time you have sex. You're supposed to have a lot of sex and occasionally a baby happens.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I think, are feeling like a little discouraged because they thought this was going to be really, really easy, including me. And we had to wait a little while before it happened. So we see you, everybody listening. We see you. This is an ordeal.
Yeah.
It's now you're wanting it, the thing that you were desperately running away from for all those years.
Right. It's an interesting switch to turn on in your brain. And I want to read a statistic just for our listeners so they know where we lie in reality in regard to fertility, infertility, suboptimal fertility, just to provide a little context and lay the groundwork for our conversation today. This was a statistic that I pulled off of. Oh gosh, I'm gonna forget the acronym here. It was like basically the Association for
American Society of Reproductive Medicine, I bet is what you're going for.
Yes, I think so. That one. Okay, so it says, according to the National Survey of Family Growth, approximately 7.4 million women in the United States, or approximately 12.1% of women of reproductive age, experience difficulty having children because of impaired fecundity. Approximately 9.4% of men are subfertile or non-surgically sterile. So we have 12.1% of women having reproductive issues, 9.4% of men having subfertility or non-surgical sterility. So what is, I think it's important to differentiate here, what is the difference between infertility and suboptimal fertility?
Yeah, this term subfertility, I think, is more appropriate because the numbers that ASRM is deriving, and this is the society similar to what ACOG does really for the generalist OBGYN. The ASRM is really helping to formulate guidelines for the endocrinologist, the reproductive endocrinologist. And those are doctors like me, OBGYNs, who go to extra training for 2 to 3 years, sometimes longer, to be really, really good at the pharmaceutical means to compel the body to get pregnant, right? Which comes with a lot of procedures and ultrasounds and synthetic endocrine disruptors that are being injected into you just to hijack the hormone system. So the guidelines are going to be based on the statistics, right? Which is that couples are coming to us at this frequency, and therefore this is a reason that we need more REIs. The problem is that I would suspect, now this is based on my own anecdotal evidence, that less than 2% of couples are truly infertile. We'll go to definitions in a second. If we had instead investigated the upstream causes of the infertility, of the challenges getting pregnant, let's just say, perhaps that number would be way, way less, like the number reported by ASRM. But of course, here we are. So a lot of couples are going to hear these numbers from their OBGYNs. They're going to feel a little bit discouraged. They're just going to find their way into the REI clinic. And then they're going to be faced with a bill that might be upwards of $15,000 or more to go through IVF. But nobody's actually even given them any tools from the time that they go to their doctor saying, hey, we're having trouble, to the time that they're footing that bill. Nobody's giving them any direction as to what they might do in order to not only improve their chances of natural conception, but also improve the likelihood that IVF will be successful and they won't be taking on a whole bunch of pregnancy complications. So
that's not normal. Sorry to interrupt you, but that's not, if somebody goes to, and if you could define REI for our listeners, I'm assuming reproductive
endocrinology and infertility. I don't think they use that infertility thing anymore, but they're generally known as REIs. Yeah.
Okay. So if somebody's going into the REI clinic and working with a doctor of sorts, are they not getting any sort of counsel on like, okay, here's what foods you should be eating to help. Here's kind of, make sure you're moving your body, XYZ. Like, is that normal to not receive any counsel there?
Yeah, it's probably, in my experience working with REIs, there's not a lot of that. They kind of presume that we've already tried those things. And frankly, a lot of doctors, as I think most listeners are aware, are not all that privy to like what an actual healthy lifestyle looks like. I mean, they're sometimes on call for 24 hours at a time, eating hospital food that's laden with all the junk. It looks like a 7-Eleven in a hospital cafeteria. So these are not people that are the walking pinnacles of health. Right. And so even if they did give some insight, they might be like, oh, eat less and exercise more or something. Right. Yeah. And, you're a little overweight, maybe lose some pounds, whatever.
Cut out red meat.
So it's not quite what we do. Yeah, cut out red meat and switch to margarine. I mean, it's like still so antiquated, some of that advice. So very, very different from what we're going to be talking about today, or that even what you guys do in your everyday life as you're trying to get pregnant. And so that's where I think that there's a void. That's the void that I hope we can fill for people.
In this little cup, I have my favorite way to enjoy mushy love, which is in combination with cold milk. We drink raw cow's milk, and I put it about 8 ounces of milk in with about a scoop and a half of mushy love. That combination, like the cold version of mushy love, tastes like liquid graham crackers. Like, I shit you not. If you don't know yet what mushy love is, it's our mushroom elixir with 500 milligrams of chaga, which is amazing for gut support. They call it the king of mushrooms. And then 500 milligrams as well of tremella mushroom, which is the beauty mushroom. And she is most known for holding 500 times her weight in water. The more hydrated we are, the more plump and dewy and fresh and young our skin looks.
Plump and dewy.
For Mushy Love, go to getmushylove.com and you can use the code MEDICINE for a nice little discount that we only give to our medicine podcast listeners. Awesome. Okay, so let's go back to, did you define infertility and suboptimal fertility?
Let's do that. So infertility means no way, no how is this couple going to make a baby? And there's a couple really obvious things. First off, if you're not ejaculating inside of your female partner, a baby's probably not going to happen, right? But that's not real fertility. That just infertility. That just requires a little bit of education. But even if you were doing that, and you were doing it, during, I don't know, you get a semen analysis that shows you are just you have the most impressive sperm count on the planet. If the person you're having sex with has an issue within the vagina, at the level of the cervix, at the level of the uterus, at the level of the fallopian tubes, and especially if they're not ovulating, then there's not going to be an egg there for those hundreds of millions of sperm to surround and eventually persuade to merge with them in order to create a baby. So as long as you have all of the equipment and you're having, let's say, 12 to 13 bleeds, reliable bleeds and seeing changes to your cervical fluid, and the semen analysis is great, then there should be a baby happening. And so if it's not happening, that's what I would say. It's subfertility. There's something else going on there. And of course, there's a myriad of things that men and women can do to ensure that are you really infertile, or is there just some stone we haven't yet unturned? And that can be physical, mental, emotional, or even spiritual.
You mentioned the 12 to 13, bleeds throughout the year for a woman. For a man, is there anything besides getting your sperm tested, like the size of your load, like the density of your balls? Like what is there anything that we can just even get a close gauge as to whether or not those things are swimming?
That's a really good question, Chase. I think when you consider, so here's the problem with the question. We do know what normal parameters for semen should look like, right? There's a certain volume. Like if you just have a little bit of ooze coming out when you ejaculate, that's probably too little.
Sure.
If you're pumping out a whole truckload of semen, that's probably too much. And maybe the density, the concentration wouldn't be there. But most men are going to report that they shoot out a bunch of we'll just call it cum, because that's what it is. Yeah. Shoot out a bunch of cum. And if it's really, really sticky, you probably have a low concentration or even a high concentration based on inadequate seminal fluid. If the semen looks really, really clear as opposed to a little bit cloudy, that might reflect that you don't have that many swimmers. But there's not an objective way to know for men.
Okay.
So what I would say is, if a man is relatively horny and they're able to maintain an erection, right? They're waking up with an erection. They are able to, not prematurely ejaculate. They're able to have sex for as long as they'd like. And we've all been there. Every man has had a period where they've prematurely ejaculated. Sure. So let's just get it out there. Right. Including myself, everybody. Like high periods of stress, I wasn't able to maintain the activity for longer than maybe a minute, like sometimes. So with all of that being said, those are metrics for a man's health. Do you wake up feeling completely skunked and you have to drink a whole pot of coffee? Like those are all things that you can start reflecting on to determine, am I really as healthy as I think? And if all those things are true, then I bet if you went to get a semen analysis, by the way, also spending time out in nature and eating all the organic foods, all of that stuff, I bet that if you got a semen analysis, you probably would be relatively average. I have seen some people whose sperm counts are like twice what the average is. And those are people that are living extremely naturalistic, lots of time in nature, not a lot of time stressing about things, but they also happen to be single without children. So there's a variety of other sort of relational things that can impact this as well. But I think it's a good question. I think that we just need to consider, what are the general metrics of overall health? The semen analysis is probably going to reflect that.
Yeah, for sure. As far as like testosterone levels, and maybe some labs where you're actually looking at your sex hormones. Is there a relationship between like high or low testosterone and fertility?
That's another good question. It really depends on um, how you're getting your testosterone levels to where they are, right? So the obvious question, of course, and our buddy Paul Chek, this drives him bananas, is there are countless men, young men, who are using testosterone replacement therapy in order to have faster recovery and to be more jacked and stronger and jujitsu and all of these cool things. Everybody feels great when they're injecting testosterone. There's no doubt. The issue is because it's exogenous, meaning it's coming from outside of the body. It's telling the brain there's enough testosterone, and the testes are your primary source of androgens. So if the brain is hearing the signal that there's a lot of testosterone in the body, the brain is going to shut down its communication to the testes to make more. The issue here is that signal going to the testes to say make more testosterone is kind of hand in hand with the signal that says make more sperm.
Right.
So you may not be talking about exogenous steroid use, maybe not, but anything that interrupts that pathway is going to lead to a degradation of spermatogenesis, which is the process whereby you get these little, tiny little sort of primordial germ cells that become full-blown spermatozoa that are going to swim to the egg. And then, of course, there's a whole bunch of other factors. It's not just having testosterone. You also need sort of a low degree of inflammation in the body. Otherwise, those sperm, the morphology gets off, their motility goes down. And if you don't have all the micronutrients, you might have plenty of sperm, but they're just kind of not doing what sperm need to do, which is swim the equivalent by body length from LA to San Francisco. So they need time. Wow. They need to be endurance athletes.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's a cool little factoid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that
sexy little factoid.
I think that the infertility conversation is a lot of times just pointed at women, and in my own experience through being someone who I burned the candle at both ends in my 20s, I worked out all the time. I lived a crazy lifestyle, and I bottomed out my hormones at 27. I had like 100 free testosterone. A total testosterone, and free was even worse. And that recovered. I got it back up to like 500, 600, 700 in my early 30s. But then we'll still get these bouts of, call them exhaustion or fatigue, and T levels drop pretty significantly. I've never taken exogenous testosterone as much as I would have loved to along the way.
Oh yeah, probably great.
I know, but there is this sort of like gnawing feeling that I fucked something up along the way as it pertains to my fertility. And if the time comes someday where I need testosterone exogenously to support an overall healthy lifestyle and the pros outweigh the cons, great. But I'm uninterested in impacting fertility at this point. But man, there is this little voice in my head that's like, oh man, at 27, you fucked things up, and you're going to pay for it now.
It's a good thing that the body is extremely resilient. I mean, look at what people do to themselves, and they go on to have healthy children and big families or whatever. And, just a loving reminder that, when you were really being really hard on your body relative to the rest of your life, that was a very short amount of time. It wasn't 20 years, of this kind of behavior. Yeah. It was like a few years. I just think that the body is so resilient, and we don't give it enough credit that it's due when you look at like how is it able to recover from me being really hard on it. And Nathan, you've shared your story. You were extremely hard on your body for years.
Yeah. Wrecked it. Yeah. And I mean, Chase, you brought up the whole exercise thing. We become so obsessed with exercise that we sometimes bottom out our T as a consequence of exercising too much. Yeah. And then we have to replace the testosterone in order to get more gains.
Right. Right.
So it's a bizarro cycle that people fall into. There are countless accounts of endurance athletes now relating that they've got no testosterone. Their libido's gone. Of course, these are not big muscly guys, right, the Ironmans and the whatever, but they're not looking to be big and strong. They are the fittest people, though, around. But there's nothing fit about not having a normal semen analysis sufficient to get your partner pregnant naturally. So this is becoming, fortunately, a big talking point where men, I don't think we can let you off the hook, guys. And here's the other, you mentioned blood work and whatnot. Of course, I think everybody getting a baseline testosterone is probably really helpful. And if you're below like 400, you probably should start thinking about lifestyle, but replacing it with exogenous testosterone is not going to help you with your semen analysis or getting pregnant. I just want to leave it at that. So, of course, now the next question is, what is a normal semen analysis? Well, 50 years ago, the values that we say are normal, people would have been aghast. They would have been like, what is going on? How do you have no sperm? Because what we can look at is sperm count. We can look at concentration per cc of total ejaculate. We can look at the motility, which is, are the sperms moving? They don't even have to be moving in the right direction. Are they moving vigorously? And then the morphology looks like a little balloon with a tail on it. If it doesn't look like that, it doesn't count. So when we look at the World Health Organization standards, they published a new document. I think it was 2010. It's like 14, 15 years ago. But in 2010, they had said, okay, we're going to say 15 million sperm just by count per cc of ejaculate is sufficient or normal. But what does that actually mean? Well, all that means in the infertility world is that you have a greater chance of IVF being successful if you have at least 15 million sperm per cc of ejaculate. That does not mean you have just as good of chances of conceiving naturally. But that, of course, is not where allopathic medicine is going. They're going towards this sort of war against nature perpetuation of, hey, as long as we can hijack the body, we don't have to worry about our fertility rates.
Yeah.
But that, of course, is baloney because our health is suffering as a consequence.
Yeah, it's like, well, as long as we've got the Band-Aid ready, like, who cares if these humans keep hurting themselves or not optimizing their health? Like, we have the Band-Aid ready to go and it's expensive. So that's great.
It's very profitable. The industry now, I don't know if you mentioned this before, but the industry is like eclipsing $4 billion. And in a couple of years, it'll be at $5 billion for assisted reproductive technologies. Yeah. And of course, the other conditions that arise as a consequence of assisted reproductive technology, specifically IVF. And we're talking about preeclampsia. We're talking about, thyroid issues in pregnancy, gestational diabetes, like all of those things, which lead to long-term chronic health outcomes, like bad outcomes. Those are very, very expensive diseases to treat. Now, I don't think it's conspiratorial, but the medical system doesn't care about the long term. They just are determined to get you pregnant. And once you get pregnant, they've done their job, right? So, you guys can figure that out later.
Yeah.
And that's where I think this is actually very important.
Right. This is you putting the holistic into holistic OBGYN here. I do want to put out a disclaimer because we're going to be talking about IVF and assisted reproductive technologies. And if somebody's listening who has gone that route or is thinking about it or whatever, this is in no way, shape, or form meant to offend anyone or to downgrade or to diminish this technology. Of course, it's amazing. We have, close personal friends that needed to use this for anatomical anomalies that existed within them. And they have a beautiful little girl now because of this technology. So we recognize that it is necessary for some people. That being said, we on the medicine do not shy away from uncomfortable conversations just because someone might take offense to it. It's like these are conversations that need to happen, and you got to put on your big girl or big boy pants and decide not to be offended by the thing that could trigger you. So that's where we are right now.
Yeah.
Because
can I add something to what you just said? Because that's so beautifully put. The same argument sometimes comes up around breastfeeding, where people are like, "You're shaming people for not breastfeeding." And I'm like, no, this is actually not directed at any individual. This is directed at a system that collectively doesn't want you to know what power you actually, hold within yourself. They're counting on you just leaning into the medical system and coughing up all of that money. So the most disruptive thing that you can do in this fertility conversation is get yourself as healthy as possible. And then you don't even need that stuff. That 15K can go towards I don't know, a boat or something, whatever it is that your heart desires.
Yeah.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
All we have to do is just prioritize our health and well-being as this act of rebellion towards the freaking system.
Yeah. It's the biggest act of rebellion. Being your own best advocate. I just wanted to put that disclaimer out there because, this is becoming more popular. And as a medical technology becomes more popular, The societal pressure sort of releases
Yeah.
a little bit, and more people are open to it when it's like, oh, out of my 5 girlfriend, friend group, 3 of them had IVF. So it's like really normal. So
Not a big
if
deal.
we,
Yeah.
go 3 months and not get pregnant, like we could just go that route, and this is an option for us.
That's right.
And without looking at the other low hanging pieces of fruit. And so that's where I really want to go next is like someone, a couple is listening and they've been trying to get pregnant maybe for like 3 or 4 months, right? And it's not happening for whatever reason. They come to you, Nathan, and they're giving you their dollars, and they're like, we don't know what's going on. It's been 4 months and periods are pretty normal, and I'm keeping track of things. It's just not happening. What are these low hanging pieces of fruit that you grab first before we get to like the small little rocks that we can look at?
Yeah, what's most interesting about the question, and thank you for it, is that what I'm going to say in response is really not all that hard, but it is very hard given our experience thus far in most people's, living lives. Like however long you've been here, however many doctors you've seen, the experience is generally you're in, you talk for a little bit, and then you're out. And you're left with like something to pick up at the pharmacy or whatever. And while that might be really helpful for certain things, this fertility conversation oftentimes requires us to slow things down quite a bit. And for me to really use my powers of discernment to figure out what is missing here. Because truthfully, if birth is not a medical procedure, then getting pregnant is not a medical procedure either.
Right.
There's so much more magic here than just what do my hormones show? So the classic question is, hey, a very, very good friend that somebody that you know as well reached out and said, hey, I just want to get my hormones checked to see if we're fertile. That's not the right first question. I don't know if labs are going to be helpful. And by the way, labs, just like many supplements, apart from a couple, like which we can talk about, are generally not all that useful. There are uses. It's a tool, but like I can't give you the 6 hacks to get pregnant. Like it just doesn't work like that. So the labs give us a little glimpse at that moment. What is happening inside your bloodstream? It doesn't tell us actually how the mitochondria are working. It's not a direct observation of anything. It's just what happens to be swimming around in your blood. So if I were to go to the local stream, you guys came out here recently, we went on a little hike, we go down to the stream. If I were to take a sample there, and then you guys come back next year and we take another sample, it's going to look like a completely different body of water because there's stuff happening in the meantime. So while it might be useful to go to one of these big functional medicine companies and get some baseline labs, it is definitely not the whole picture. And I cannot say, based on those labs, whether or not you're fertile. So the checklist of the low-hanging fruit is, number one, you have to be having sex. But corollary to that is you have to be having sex during what's called the fertile window. And corollary to that is you determine your fertile window by getting to know your body a little bit better, Mimi. And there's a couple metrics that you can follow to determine if you are ovulating or not. Forget about the labs. The labs don't matter if you're not releasing an egg. They can suggest that you're releasing an egg, but what is happening physiologically in the body when you get the fluctuation of estrogen and progesterone at various times in the cycle? So just as a primer, you've got 2 halves of a cycle. Let's assume it's 28 days. Nobody has a reliably 28-day cycle every month. But let's call it 28 days. The first half is the follicular phase. The second half is called the luteal phase. The first half, follicles are growing, maybe 15 on each ovary. They're pumping out estrogen. Progesterone is super low. Then there's a signal from the brain, luteinizing hormone, that triggers one of those follicles that has dominated over the others, which, by the way, that dominance, the primary feature is that it's able to convert androgens to estrogen, specifically estradiol, way more efficiently than the other follicles. And it is rewarded with cracking open and releasing an egg, which hopefully will meet a sperm. So then that little follicle, it reforms itself into a little endocrine organ. It's beautiful. Like the beautiful, elegant orchestration of all this is just awesome. Now you have a follicle that was doing nothing but helping to support this ovum, the egg. It forms itself into a new endocrine organ that pumps out high levels of progesterone. So that's the luteal phase. And that progesterone helps to prepare the lining of the uterus so that if an embryo is going to embed, it has got a nice landing spot there. And of course, there's the immune system is involved here. There's all these other factors that are actually relevant to not rejecting that embryo, but allowing it to grow into the uterine wall to form a placenta and ultimately a baby, which is going to be birthed out in 9.5 months. It's incredible. But because of these fluctuations, specifically, we'll just talk about estrogen and progesterone, you get changes to a variety of things in the body. That's why there are PMS-like symptoms. That's why the uterus cramps up at times. That's why you ultimately shed the lining of your uterus. But also, there's a change in the position of the cervix. It aims like a cannon towards the opening of the vagina, and it opens up a little bit. And the mucus that's plugging it, preventing anything from going up into that space, becomes a little bit more like egg whitey, and it starts to form channels for the sperm to blast through there. But they can't get through if the cervical mucus isn't changing cyclically. The biome changes, everything changes in order to optimize the chances that your egg, Mimi, and Chase's sperm are going to meet and create a baby. So when you track your fertility, what it means is tracking what's the consistency of the stuff coming out of your vagina first thing in the morning. You could also insert fingers in and feel, is the cervix in a position that feels like it's right there, or is it completely unreachable?
Also,
if it's right there. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to chime in with if ladies are listening and you don't feel like you want to like shove your fingers up, when you have sex at different times during your cycle,
oh yeah,
I will literally tell Chase, like, it feels like you're hitting my heart. Like,
not a bad problem to have over here.
And sometimes it's, sometimes you feel that more than others. It's because literally my cervix is lower or higher, based on where I'm at in my cycle. And so anyways, it's just a little.
So either Chase has a 3 foot cock, right, or the cervix itself is an erogenous zone, which of course, Mimi, you and I get into in depth in Clear and Free, right, our holistic solution to persistent HPV. But the cervix is really fascinating. Mm-hmm. It changes position. It creates and changes this mucus. It's cool. Really elegant what this thing does. And it's a primary source of, or a primary nexus of a bunch of nerve endings that contribute to the overall sexual experience of conceiving, which we'll get into as another low-hanging fruit. So anyways, cervical position, the quality of the cervical fluid, which when you're starting to enter that 5 to 6 days when you can get pregnant, it's called the fertile window. You'll see it change to an egg white consistency. That's when you have sex. Spoiler. Not when you see the LH strip change, because that is too late. You need those sperm to swim from LA to San Francisco. You want them introduced 3 to 4 days before the LH strip changes. And that's what everybody's getting wrong. And then, of course, after the ovulation, there's a small bump in your basal body temperature, like 0.4 to 0.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Super subtle, but it can be mapped out if you're tracking these things. And so the low-hanging fruit sounds like a lot, but actually, once you start appreciating how these things change, you're going to know so much more about your body that you can finally start to take control as to what this food is doing, what this supplement is doing, what all of the stress, the sleep, is it causing a good change or a bad change to these different metrics? And you will almost know everything you need to know, more so than most OBGYNs, because I never even learned this in my residency.
Mm-hmm. No, it's so great.
It's like, I was just about to say, we went to a Christian school. We grew up in a completely sheltered environment. I'm almost 34 and I'm hearing some of this stuff for the first time. I don't know if, secular kids out there got this education in public school, but I'm sitting here like, one, this is incredible, just straight up information. Would have been nice to have for the first 34 years of my life. Two, this is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The dance. Oh God,
freaking magical.
It's so cool.
And it makes so much sense. I mean, I've spent so much of my, probably last 7 or 8 years learning about the rhythms of nature itself and the cyclical nature that life is, and seasonality, and how important it is for this human meat suit to lean into those seasons. And we all go through this death and rebirth cycle in 1,000 million different ways throughout our life. And if we can start picking up on those trends and leaning into them instead of like just happenstance walking around life and wondering why the hell it feels like we're walking upstream, God, life's going to make so much more sense. And why not in the realm of fertility? Why not? Of course it is. Of course, the life component to having a baby and reproduction and the state of evolution that we're all in, it makes so much sense that this is another instance of rhythm, another instance of cycling and seasonality, that if we only just lean into, we're going to feel as if we are actually swimming with the stream.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you brought up, the first piece being, are you having sex at the right time? Because yeah, if people are, if they're guessing when they're ovulating, or if they're, peeing on an ovulation strip, I do like the ovulation strips because it does show you when that peak is. But then take note of that, and for your next cycle, start 2, 3, 4 days sooner.
That's right.
And so my next question is on the note of having sex in the right time, in the right window. Is it advantageous to have sex 3 times in that window, or what would you say there?
That's a really good question. So in the Born Free community, we just had one of our mutual friends, Mimi Berry there. She's a fertility awareness educator, and she had said, or somebody had said in the comments in the Born Free weekly call that, hey, my friend, my sister's in this journey or whatever, and the doctor said you should be having sex every other day. 2 problems with that. Number one, you can only get pregnant for you can really only get pregnant. Let's define the fertile window for about 6 to 7, maybe 5 to 6 days out of the month if sperm are introduced. But the day that you actually get pregnant, like, the window is very, very narrow. The ovum is released, the egg, and if it doesn't meet those sperm, they're passing ships in the night. So there's a very, very narrow window during which conception can happen. And so one of the curiosities that I've had to be sort of confronted by is this notion that it's 1 egg and 1 sperm. Well, it's not 1 egg and 1 sperm. In fact, despite what Darwinian evolutionary biology has told us, it is not a survival of the fittest. Those sperm are probably cooperating with one another to make sure that one of them is invited into the ovum and be engulfed. And you can see this on video. Like, you can see under a microscope, they've got an egg, which, by the way, is the largest cell in the human body. You can see it with the naked eye. It's about the size of a period on paper. And so you can see it. They have that in the petri dish. They flush a whole bunch of sperm, and the sperm bum rush this egg, and they surround it. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands, just bam, 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 3-dimensionally, bam, 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 bam. The egg will start rotating counterclockwise. Why? I have no idea. But it starts rotating, and then there's a zinc and magnesium moderated reaction where there's actually an explosion. If you turn the lights out, you will see it for a moment. It's like a spark ignites, and then there's an engulfing of the sperm by the egg. So going back to your question, how often do you have sex? You save up all of those sperm so that you're not just having a little measly. Like, you want a full-blown ejaculation whenever that fertile window starts.
Yeah.
So that means, men, that you're not watching porn, you're not jacking off every day, you're probably keeping your cell phones out of your pockets, you're probably not doing prolonged sauna sessions, despite what all the IG geeks tell you is really healthy. There might be actually an opportunity here to stop doing some of those things, start eating some more nutritious foods, because you want to bump up your sperm count and the motility and the morphology and get all of that systemic inflammation down. Take some immune intel HCC, get it going. And then when the time is right, you're not going to have a part of your total sperm count. You're going to have the entire army ready. As soon as you see, Mimi relates that there's egg whites, on the toilet paper in the morning. And that will ensure that you're not blowing your load too soon, so to speak.
Yeah.
And when the day comes, you've had a whole month of waiting and explosion time.
This is really good, because I've been wondering a lot about this. We have sex quite a bit. We're not, it's not every single day, but we have sex quite a bit. And I've been wondering, like, man, do I like, hold some things in for a while, maybe even practice some of these very trendy sexual kung fu techniques that everybody seems to be doing that I've only ever done on accident. But it's like, okay, I wanted to know if there was some truth to that. Like, okay, Mimi's fertile window, the 6-day fertile window, is coming up in about 10 days. Maybe for a week leading up, I should just really harness my sperm and see if there's some sort of, just like, even if it's just energetic or mental, that can support this, but like charging the sperm, if you will, until the window of time is open. I've thought about that one.
Yeah.
Two, I sauna regularly. I have used ice or they make this underwear now that includes little packets for ice around your balls. I think they're called snowballs, which is just a great name for
That's an awesome branding.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
it was a Christmas gift.
So I use those and have hopefully been preventing, some of the degradation on my sperm. But I will absolutely abstain if that's necessary. But yeah, I was going to, one of my questions was like, should we refrain from sex leading up to the fertile window? And if so, for how long? And is there a point that would be too long? Do you need to like almost keep them fresh to a certain degree?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the broiest question ever, by the way.
Raw. Yeah. Well, listen, I've got some bra in me. And when my wife and I pulled the goaltender in San Diego, we were living near you. We were living in Claremont, actually. I was in fellowship and I was riding my bike every single day to work. It was like 8 miles back and forth wearing probably wasn't wearing as tight of shorts as I used to wear when I was competing, but it was just like pressure on the perineum that my junk is kind of just wedged in there. And I would oftentimes stop at the climbing gym and climb for, an hour or two. And then I would sauna after that for 20, 30 minutes, cranking up the temperature as high as possible, because the hotter it is, the more sweaty you get and the more mental fortitude you build and all this other stuff. And while we were eating organic food and all that, I wasn't eating a lot of organ meats. I wasn't eating a lot of oysters. I wasn't eating a lot of the things that I then later found, oh man, this might be helpful. CoQ10, really high quality, high dose fish oil, those types of things can be very, very supportive. And not to mention, just like sleeping, like I wasn't sleeping a lot. So because I was in fellowship. So all of this is to say, Steph and I didn't get pregnant after 4 or 5 cycles. And I was like, well, let me just go get an analysis. I had a friend who's an OBGYN. He wrote it for me to the urologist. I went and got it done. And lo and behold, the count was okay, but the motility was down. And if those sperm aren't vigorously swimming, they can't make the trip up the West Coast, right? So I took it upon myself to now like use my own repertoire to try to figure this out, because I never learned any of this stuff in residency. And I did all of those things and everything jumped like dramatically.
Wow.
But a part of that was having to give up a couple of things that I held near and dear.
Yeah.
Now, we're talking about 20 to 30 minutes of high temp sauna. When they've studied this, and it was a Finnish study, there was a couple of studies out of Finland where they looked at a man's semen analysis and associated it with sauna use. And the Finnish saunas, that's like Paul's sauna, they can be very, very, very hot. It's not like one of those wimpy infrareds. Right. It is real deal. That might perturb your spermatogenic sort of this process from unfolding. I want to caution people by saying, listen, if you are the healthiest person possible and you are saunaing, taking that away might help you. If you're a really, really unhealthy person, sauna is probably still helpful to you. It's just something to consider if on semen analysis you're seeing somewhat suboptimal results. It might be something you peel back. But also, I was wearing the tight shorts. I had one of these things, 4 powerful modems, which is more powerful. Each of those modems is more powerful than what we used to have to wait through to get on our home computers when we were kids. Mm-hmm. In our pockets, next to our testicles.
Nuts.
And really next to your gonads as well, Mimi, if it's in your front pocket, even in your back pocket. Mm-hmm. So I had this on at all times. I was in a hospital loaded with EMF. I was eating hospital food, like in between my healthy meals at home. It was the whole picture.
Yeah.
So I don't want anybody to think that like sauna, Dr. Riley's saying sauna is bad. No. But if you do get a semen analysis that's off and you're like, I'm doing everything right, you might want to consider peeling back on the sauna. Yeah. I think it probably overall was more beneficial than risky, but I did it all. I went no underwear, commando at work. I was like, I'm in it to win it here.
Definitely. Last question on sperm, and then we can keep moving. How quickly can you recover motility or count? Like, can it be a couple weeks, or is this more like 6 months?
So your testicles within the, I believe it's in the epididymis, if I recall, that's where the sperm are sort of going through its maturation process. That process, it takes a couple months, but you're doing it all the time. It's in the, not the epididymis, it's in the seminiferous tubules or whatever. Maybe that's in the epididymis. It doesn't really matter. There's a part of the testicles where the sperm are matured, and it takes many months for them to get to be fully matured, but it's like a full-blown assembly line 24/7 running. So what I would expect to see is that if you did it, you did your semen analysis, what I would do is repeat it in 12 weeks and take those 12 weeks to live your healthiest life possible.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Not weekly, not something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Yeah. I definitely want to move on here to some of the other major lifestyle factors, like people who come to you who are having fertility issues. Okay, say they're having sex in the right window, they know when they're ovulating, they're doing all that. I think talking about maybe some top foods and maybe hydration, or what are these other low hanging pieces of fruit that we can look at before we jump to like the energetics of it all.
Yeah, sure. So when I was thinking about the other low hanging fruit, and maybe we can get into we'll get into like the conscious conception stuff separately, because I think the way that we connect intimately is actually important. Let me talk about maybe, and as well as like learning your own birth story. Believe it or not, that's actually a really fascinating part of this conversation. But let's start with like maybe the basic workup real quick, and then maybe what we can tell through like some functional testing and whatnot. I think that might be super helpful. So typically what the OBGYNs are going to be capable of doing is determining whether you have the right anatomy, and if there's a distortion in the anatomy, like within the uterine cavity, if there's big old polyps or there's fibroids, or you have a uterine septum, or maybe a wholly unusual uterine anomaly, like you've got two separate uteruses with two separate cervices. That's a pretty unusual thing, but it can happen. Oftentimes, if you develop one of those, or if you're found to have one of those anomalies, you probably are missing one of your kidneys. Just as a little fun fact for everybody, the kidneys, and interestingly, the GU tract, the urinary tract, and the reproductive systems are derived from the same primordial tissue. So you end up with issues with both of those systems hand in hand. It's kind of interesting stuff. But when you go to your doctor, they're going to be able to very, very easily determine: do you have a uterus? Do you have tubes? Do you have ovaries? Do you have a vagina and a cervix? If any of those things is missing, some genetic testing I think would be warranted. But most women are not going to be like shocked by something like that happening, because it's so rare. So let's assume you have all of the right equipment. Of course, in my first meeting with people, I want to get their entire sexual history. I want to make sure that if it has been some gonorrhea, chlamydia, some extensive smoking history, what have you. I want to make sure that those tubes are working. The tubes are these really delicate pipes that have little tiny hairs that actually shuffle the eggs towards the uterine cavity from the ovaries, which are outside of the uterus. And if those cells are damaged, either through infection or cigarette smoking, a lot of toxic stuff probably in our lifestyle are also associated with that, you won't get the movement of the egg through the tube, and what we call that is tubal factor infertility, meaning you've got everything there, but the bridge is not working between the ovary and the uterus. Ultrasounds, infusing some saline into the uterus. These are all very low intervention, relatively low radiation procedures that can show if there's a clear open uterine cavity. You can actually look at the ovaries on ultrasound. I think that's like the basics, right? Now the next step is what else should we be thinking about? Two big things that probably many women are suffering from, maybe without even realizing it, is insulin resistance, meaning you have relatively high blood sugars at all times of the day. Getting a continuous glucose monitor and monitoring that for a few months for $400 out of pocket might be worthwhile if you haven't been eating the healthiest food, or there's a lot of processed stuff, or maybe you're just not even sleeping well. That can all lead to insulin resistance. If you don't have a lot of muscle mass, for the men out there, that is one way to boost your testosterone. Just a little bit of exercise does quite a bit to getting your testosterone up, to getting your sex hormone binding globulin regulated, all of that stuff. The other area to look at is the thyroid. And most doctors run one test for the thyroid. They run a TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. But I've done all this other functional medicine training with Mark Hyman at the Institute for Functional Medicine. And the thyroid there are so many other factors that play into that I think a basic thyroid workup would just consist of like, let's look at TSH, but also the T4 and T3. Let's look at antibodies against the thyroid. Hashimoto's is the most common cause of low thyroid, hypothyroidism in our country, probably worldwide now. It used to be iodine deficiency, but nowadays we generally get enough iodine. And if you're eating the oysters, of course, you're getting more iodine. But if you can just do the full panel, the thyroid and blood sugars are probably going to catch quite a number of people who otherwise thought that they were perfectly healthy. And then the next step, of course, would be to go deeper into the functional testing. But I don't know if we want to necessarily go there right now, but we can if you'd like.
No, I think that that's good. Obviously, if somebody is having issues, hopefully they would be working with a health coach or practitioner or fertility awareness guide of some kind that they can get directed towards the tests that are necessary for their individual situation. But, I really want people who are listening to be able to, be empowered in their everyday living. Like, what can I do on an everyday basis to support my fertility aside from like the tests that if I get there and I need that, then okay. But like, what should people be doing on a daily basis?
Like, what do they grab at the grocery store? What supplements? If you were to say, hey, this is your starter pack.
Yeah, like if you, with all of your knowledge now, if you and Stephanie had no kids and you're like, all right, we're gonna try. Like, what are you doing in daily life, and what are you encouraging Stephanie to, or what is she doing?
Yeah, the very, very first thing. And in fact, I actually sometimes have this as a prerequisite for certain couples that come to me. I say for the next 6 weeks, you're going to sleep for at least 8 hours a night, 5 nights out of the 7.
Wow.
We're going to do that.
That's a big task.
Yeah, it's a huge task. But notice I haven't even mentioned anything about labs. Like I haven't even charged them any money.
Mm-hmm.
Sleep for 5 or more nights per week for 6 weeks, at least 8 hours. Close the blinds, black out the room, put on your blue blockers at night. Don't be smoking a ton of cannabis because that also can impact spermatogenesis. I love cannabis, but people that are smoking it all day, every day do tend to have lower levels of testosterone due to what we call hypogonadism. It basically means your testicles just aren't functioning at their optimal. Okay. So when you sleep, you turn off your routers, you do all of that stuff. That's the first step. The other thing you have to do is you have to add 2 distinct foods. Smoked oysters. This is for fertility specifically, but it really is great for anybody. For smoked oysters, I like those Crown Prince ones. They have like a chili pepper flavor. You can get some like corn or cassava tortilla chips or something. It's a delicious snack in the afternoon. Twice per week, 2 to 3 times per week. And beef liver in whatever form you want to get it, whether it's raw, whether it's cooked into a burger patty. Noble Protein now has a tail to nose protein powder. If you're into that, they have some additional organ meats you can add. There's desiccated organ meat capsules from companies like Paleo Valley or Force of Nature. Like there's a lot of options out there, but you have to do that 3 times per week, and you have to do oysters 3 times per week for 6 weeks. Now, after the 6 weeks, then I will start doing the labs and everything. But sleep and those nutritional inputs will fix the issue, if there is one, for I'd say at least half of the people.
Mm-hmm.
The other things that I would have you do is start supplementing with a high quality fish oil, start supplementing with coenzyme Q10, and probably start supplementing with a high quality magnesium. And the only reason is that most of the people out there who are struggling probably are going to be found to have relatively low levels of that. A big reason for the organ meats is that there's a lot of iron, but there's also all these other micronutrients, including B vitamins. Up to 60% of women, at least, have some variant of the MTHFR mutation. That means that they're not able to utilize all of their liver enzymes to the maximum capacity. So if you're not getting methylfolate, which is nature's form, and you're taking folic acid, that's not as good. So you notice I haven't even started with the prenatal vitamin. Get your food in order, get your sleep in order, build some muscle, drop some fat. And then of course there's all of the interrelational things. But I think if you just start with those things, I think you're probably going to already be better off.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, the other things require a little bit more explanation, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that that's great.
Really
just some pieces that people can hang on to.
I've grown to love the smoked oysters.
Yeah.
Since I met you, I think that was one of the first things you recommended. And I have not stopped.
Copper,
since.
zinc, selenium, manganese, magnesium, molybdenum, fatty acids, like they are packed full. And that's why they were also historically aphrodisiacs. Like make a lot of sperm, your sex hormones go back up. Like it's really, really good.
Yeah.
For us
Awesome.
men, especially.
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
be using
And they
these.
look like balls, so it makes complete sense.
They do.
As far as like environment, a listener of the medicine is no stranger to the amount of environmental exposure that they're getting in the form of, toxicity. What can people do? Where you can go crazy trying to prevent yourself from being exposed to God
Yeah.
knows what. You can literally get
Oh, yeah.
paranoid about the freaking air that you're breathing. But what are you generally recommending for people, and not to scare the hell out of them, but as a go-to strategy for ensuring that they're not stepping through clouds of toxic soup or vapor
Yeah.
that it could be potentially impacting them?
So what we do in our home, kind of going back to what Mimi's question was like, what do you actually do? I mean, I could talk for an hour about what we do, but we have like our HEPA air purifiers in our home because there's just so much junk in the outside. A lot of people use that for allergens. We use it for the just sort of smog, the actual pollution in the air. That, of course, can impact how your mitochondria work. And everybody's talking about mitochondria right now. But I just learned from Lily Nichols and Lisa Hendricks and Jack, their book is amazing for anybody out there who wants like a really good guide, Real Food for Fertility. Lisa, on my own podcast, said, do you know how many mitochondria are in the human ovum, like one of Mimi's eggs? It's in the like tens of thousands.
Wow.
In one single cell. And what I learned in biology was, you have the nucleus and you have the mitochondria, maybe a couple, you have some ribosomes, whatever. This thing is packed, filled with mitochondria.
Wow.
And the mitochondria function through the processing of oxygen to make energy. The issue is that all of those cytochrome processes along the chain, what we call the electron transport chain, can get gunked up by external toxic stuff. And by electrosmog. So you've got your EMF, you've got the radiation coming from every which device, all the cell phone towers, all of that. So we shut off everything at night, like all of our routers, everything goes off at like midnight, I think, and comes back online at 7 a.m. We have our air purifiers running at all times. We have a greenfield water system to get a whole bunch of the stuff out of our water, which we live right on the Ohio. So we've got these like chemical spills happening upstream of us, like in East Palestine, Ohio. And, Ben Joseph Stewart, one of our mutual friends, like his wife, Barbara, called and was like, what are we going to do? Like, this is our water supply because they live in Tennessee. And we both immediately went to Greenfield and we're like, give me your best product because like, I'm not willing to risk it. I'm going to pay $5,000. It's a lot of money, but I'm going to get the Mac Daddy product in here because I don't want my little girls swimming in a super toxic shit that's going to lead to some issues for them later. Let's see what else I think is really, really important. I feel like that's probably the brunt of it. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other things like I wear a biogeometry pendant. We have our grid lines, nullified through the biogeometry practices I've learned through Ibrahim Karim and Doria Karim over at their institute. But I think that really probably covers a lot of it, and being very, very conscious as to where our meat and our food and our fish and everything is coming from.
Yeah. Quickly, we've had conversations on this podcast, and we've had guests come in that speak about the benefits of parasite cleanses and using binders like activated charcoal or chlorella or something along those lines to, essentially flush out the toxicity. Would that or could that be potentially too invasive for someone trying to conceive or even in a pregnancy state? Because those can actually be quite disruptive to the body. Yeah,
I think everybody should consider the cleanses and even a lot of supplements. I think you should consider it as like a 6-week tool. Like you're going to do this thing and then you're finished.
Yeah, that's
as
really
opposed
good.
to I do my colonic every month or whatever. Like maybe you don't need to do that every month.
Yeah.
Maybe your body needs some time to like reestablish itself. I think it's also important to remember that everything we put into our body is not going to our cells. It's going to our microbes. And then our microbes decide what happens to it. So if there's anything that you're putting into your body that can disrupt this beautiful balance of beneficial and pathogenic bacteria in the gut, which by the way is integrated into roughly 70 to 80% of your immune system through gut-associated lymphoid tissue in the intestines, all of the stuff that you're eating, the bacteria sort it out and help get it through. If that balance falls out of whack, you can get estrogen dominance because you have some Clostridium difficile, let's say, which expresses an enzyme called beta-glucuronidase. It helps to reabsorb estrogen from the gut. So you never excrete it at all. It goes right back in. And so if you're doing too many of these different cleanses, too many things at once, the intestines like need time to reequilibrate and reestablish itself. So use them as tools and be like discerning as to why you're doing it.
Really good.
You know, like ask the right questions.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, no, that's good. I want to just pivot a little bit to the energetic side of baby making. One aspect being, you know, just in the bedroom, how it can, for some couples, become sort of like a science experiment, you know, where the passion and the quote unquote love, the enjoyment is not necessarily there. It's like, just put it in me, put the semen where it needs to go so that I can hopefully get pregnant. And who cares if I come or not? It's just like, you know, A plus B equals C. I hear that a lot from people who are trying to get pregnant. And funnily enough, it seems like once people do, you know, put the responsibility in someone else's hands, and that weight is lifted off of them, it's like, boom, you know, they get pregnant even faster, because it's like, it's not my worry anymore. But I'm getting ahead of myself. But let's speak to the energetics a little bit of the science experiment, and how couples can either offset that or anticipate that in a way, or I would just say go at it in a more loving and enjoyable way. Like, how are you recommending that for patients or clients?
Yeah, you know, what you described there is, you know, the couple that's been trying for years, they go in for a consultation, and then like they go home and have sex, and they've given their problem to somebody else, and now a baby is conceived, right? I've that has happened so many times in my career, not even just in my practice, just hearing about it. And I think a lot of people would say, oh, you know, your stress was mitigated and now your body got pregnant. Maybe that's a part of it. But more importantly, what if there was actually some lesson here that the spirit of your baby was trying to teach you? And like, play with me here, listeners, for just a second. Because if this is a medical procedure, then go for it. Let's just shoot a bunch of semen into a bunch of women and we'll incubate babies and we'll have a perfect world, right? But if it's not just a medical procedure, if there's actually something magical here, and by the way, we don't even know where babies come from. We don't know what life even means. Anthroposophic medicine gives us some language for it, but we still don't know. And that's why it's so magical. That's why it requires a little bit of reverence. What if the spirit of your baby is floating up there somewhere? I don't know where, some other place, maybe some other dimension, and is saying, oh, mom and dad aren't ready for this. You know, like, there's something here that my contract in coming on Earth side is meant to teach the people that I'm choosing as my parents. If you're willing to accept that maybe there's something to that, because there are mediums like Emily Green, who wrote A Cosmic Bond.
Yeah.
She's a spiritual medium. She is a gangster. And she has been hearing these signals from the spirits of babies since she was a little girl. Didn't realize what they were until later. And was like, oh my God, I'm communicating with unborn babies.
We just had our session with her like 10 days ago, and it was absolutely incredible. I'll have to tell you about it.
She is so neat. Yeah, I mean, and I don't know if I would believe it if she didn't tell me these stories where women will go to her feeling bad about their 5th miscarriage, and she'll actually get them to tap into, did you get any signal? Because I'm not special, Emily is. I'm not special. You get the signals too. I'm just able to hear them. And something will click for them. And they're like, you know what? The day before I had that miscarriage, I had this very weird dream where a baby came to me and said, you know, it's not my time. And I didn't know what that was. And then I started bleeding the next day. And like we're not super sensible. We're so distracted by all these other things. And so if you can believe a story like that the baby decided it's not my time, maybe the baby does have some say over how they're born or how they're conceived or how long they're going to be here. Maybe them leaving at 6 months of pregnancy, maybe that was actually a part of something they contracted with in the universe that you just aren't privy to. And maybe there's a lesson for us through miscarriage. I know it's hard to hear that, and I'm not bypassing the tremendous pain that people go through. But what I am saying is that perhaps your tendency to try to control everything is actually what you need to break free from in order for this conception to take place. And maybe that little baby's up there to help you relinquish control for maybe the first time in your life. And once you go to that doctor and you hand the ball to them, It's out of my control. And pow, the baby's like, okay, you're ready. Shoop, I'm in. And here we go.
Yeah.
Right? Like that shouldn't be too outlandish for people to imagine. And from the various stories I've heard, there's something to this. So there's something to how a baby is invited in. And that's where the conscious conception piece evolves and the intimate connection piece. Maybe the baby wants you and Chase to have sex in a different way. Or maybe they want Chase to do more foreplay and for Mimi to have the largest, wildest, most titillating orgasm of her life.
It's funny thinking about like a spirit baby, like, Mom, you got to get kinkier.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Or maybe, maybe you need whips and chains. Or maybe they were waiting for you to recommit in front of people that have grown doubtful of one of you.
Sure.
You know, like Mimi's family thinks Chase was the worst at one point. Chase's family thought Mimi's the worst at one point. I don't know if that's true, but the point is, you needed to declare that we are going to be our own unit. And your baby was saying, guys, as soon as you can do that, I know that you're ready to bring me in.
Yeah. I mean, that was like, in all honesty, we just recently got remarried. And that was really important to me before this family planning process. And I don't give a shit about the world's definition of marriage, but like when it comes to the sacred connection that we have and the container that we're holding for family and legacy, it was really, really important that we go through a spelled out, intentional, conscious process for spiritually, like almost drawing this perimeter or the safety and the alchemy pot that will be our family. And that starts with what I hope to be a child, but then that container lives and continues its vitality to face the world. The world is chaotic. And if we can bring that chaos into what we call family and this alchemy pot and recycle it into something that can be of love and service to whatever, like that is what I want family to look like. And it was, I felt this almost like weight, as if we don't go through this process, something that was lacking in our first marriage was a spiritual cord of any kind. That if we don't sort of like take this opportunity to fasten this container, you know, who knows? Maybe it has leakage, or maybe it's not exactly what we hope it could be. And so it was definitely something that was not heavy, but felt I felt called to.
It felt significant in the way that something sacred feels significant. It's not necessarily heaviness, but it's like this has weight in the ether, you know, and it really felt like our souls were being like braided together with our little spirit baby. I felt the spirit of this child through the entire process almost. This was 3 days after, you know, we got remarried 3 days after the spirit baby session with Emily, and you know, she made it very clear in this session. We'll probably do an episode on our experience, but she made it very clear, Emily did, that, you know, she's like, she's showing me this visual of her standing at a door, the spirit of this child, like knocking on the door, like ready. And all we have to do is kind of like reach down and turn the knob and she'll be there. She's been waiting. But what she said was that this child really appreciates and respects our individual journeys and how much effort and time and energy we have to put into ourselves individually, and then coming together and making this a very conscious decision. And that was even more cemented 3 days later with our sacred ceremony, you know, braiding our souls together. So it felt Beautiful. Like very official in the best way. Yeah.
And well, you know, and for people listening, you guys have a very special connection. You guys have known each other for so long. What I want to impress upon people is you can start now, but you have to start somewhere. And it could be developing a practice that you do together, or it could be what I oftentimes have couples start with, just to illustrate the importance of this, is to write a mission statement. And so, you know, Chase, tell me about you. Tell me about, you know, where you want to go in the future. Tell me about what archetype you want to embody. You know, all these types of questions. Why do you want to be a dad? Why is it important to you? And then I'll have Mimi do the same. And most of the times, the men write this much, and the women write like 3 pages.
Right.
And it turns out that there might even be some limiting beliefs. Like maybe he says he wants to be a dad, but he's so scared, or he doesn't really even know what it means to be a dad or why, but he's doing it because his partner wants to. That spirit of your baby may not necessarily feel like it's the right time. And of course, let's also put a little disclaimer. Babies are conceived in a myriad of ways that are not just through loving,
Right.
intimacy.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that the person who was raped and there was a conception that's what they wanted, or the baby wanted that, or I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we can just get out of the box of just the merely mechanical, and we can play with some of these things. And oftentimes when you do the mission statement, or you develop, like Stephanie and I just started a chanting practice where every day we chant for about 30 minutes, 40 straight days for the first chakra, 40 straight days for the second chakra. We're finishing up the first chakra. We have had some of the nastiest fights we've had in a long time, because it's starting to like get that safety and security thing up and out.
Sure.
We've got like sniffles. My wife's neck has been in spasm for 2 weeks. Like, this shit is real.
Wow.
But because we're doing it together, we're like, oh my God, this chanting, this is real stuff. If anybody's curious, like vocal transformation, Marin Azoff, holy shit, it's like a really, really big deal. So anyways, Mimi, did I answer your question there? Like,
Yeah.
is that a good starting point?
Yeah, I think so. And we kind of hijacked it with our own story, but like, I just want, I want to encourage couples out there who are trying to conceive, or maybe thinking about it, like, how can we embrace more of the love and the magic and the sacredness versus just thinking about it as a science experiment? Because like, we can enjoy the process. And I think having that intention going into it is a really beautiful thing. And so I know that you work with couples and you encourage them to like, just, look at the way that you're touching each other, look at the way that you're interacting, and and anything else there that you want to add to the magic and the love
Intimacy
that is also created alongside a little baby.
Yeah, I don't know who told me this. It sounds like something Paul Chek would say, but like vivacious children are born through like vivacious conception. And so if you're just doing this mechanical plug-in away thing, okay, my mucus changed, let's have sex, it's time. Obviously, it gets to that point for a lot of couples. But a good reason, I think, whenever people do relinquish control, is that they actually get back to just like, let's just connect. And for the men out there, you are not entitled to have sex with your partner. Like, the intimacy piece is what leads ultimately to intercourse. So you might connect for 2 weeks before you have great sex. And then you might have to connect for 2 more weeks before you have great sex. That's actually more like the pattern that my wife and I have, unless I go on a trip and then I come back and we just have a lot of sex. But with 2 little girls running around and a lot of our other responsibilities, I have to actually get her ready to surrender to that and to accept me. She's not compelled to have sex with me just because we're married.
Right.
And the more I can pay attention to her, not just like, what do you need, but like co-regulate with her and be with her and be present with her. That's what makes her want to have sex, not my erection, right? Like, I have a decent penis, but it's not like, oh my God, I can't wait to have sex with that man again. Like, I am tired. I've been slapped and hit and yelled at by the little girls all day. Like, it's going to take some persuasion here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
That's
No.
really good.
TMI, I guess. But
No,
here we
it's
are.
all good.
Really good, man.
It's all good.
Really good.
Yeah, I definitely, I've wanted to go into this in a very like conscious, intentional, like, I just want to enjoy the process and not have it be a science-y thing. Because again, I am a firm believer that the intention that you put into something will be felt as an ingredient. Like, you can taste when the cookies are made with love versus freaking, Chips Ahoy.
That's right.
Like, I
That's
want
right.
our cookie to be baked with love rather than just, the ingredients are there,
Yeah.
Great analogy.
Yeah.
Thanks, babe. Yeah. What are we missing? Is there anything else? I know you speak to IVF quite a bit as far as the energetic piece. We've mentioned it before with like, we don't, the spark that happens. Is there anything else that you want to add to this conversation around like the energetics of IVF versus, in the bedroom?
Yeah, no, and I'd love to get to that. If you're going through all of these sort of like tiered approaches, and then you're still like, yo, it's not happening, and there's this thing called IVF. How do you evaluate that? Let's pros, cons. Who is it for? Who is it not for? Et cetera.
I think a theme that comes up in this conversation a lot is this sort of like insecurity around, finances, around, we want to get pregnant, but we're not ready financially, or I don't have my dream job yet, or we're only living in a small place, or my sister and her husband are traveling in Europe as vagabonds and they got pregnant and they're like, fuck, we don't have a house. Like, what are we going to do? And they're coming back, have to find a house
Yeah.
at 6 months. Like, so there's a lot of this sort of insecurity. And then there's also all of the other things that we've talked about that weigh heavily on people. It makes you feel insecure. It makes you feel unsafe. It makes you feel not ready. And you start backpedaling. So the IVF thing adds to that because now you've been examined, you've had things stuck inside of you, you've been told maybe your body's broken in other words. And now you're looking at a bill that might be like $15K, most of which is going to be out of pocket. All of this is going to be uprooting deep-seated first chakra issues. And so I can't impress people enough the importance from the sex to the decisions around which path you take to how you are pregnant and give birth. The autonomic nervous system doesn't know a true threat from a perceived threat. So a big part of, I think, what we talk about going forward is to recognize that sometimes this path may have not been the path you chose, but to stress out about that is going to make this even harder for you. Sometimes you just need to jump into the current and be like, fuck it, this is what we're doing. And if you decide to do it, own it and love it and cherish it. Make it fun somehow. I don't know, but let's not just beat ourselves up every single step of the way.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the conversation between natural conception and IVF is quite complicated, even more so complicated than I thought. I always had a sense that there was some psychic difference on the soul level of a baby conceived in a petri dish versus a baby conceived naturally. And then I was on a recent panel and there was a doctor, he's a pediatrician. I think he's had like 7 books. He's like an MD, PhD, and 14 other titles after his name. His name's Thomas Verney. And he has like a German accent from what I remember, like, yeah, German or something. But he was on this panel with me around fatherhood. And somebody asked, well, the dad wants to be what if there's not a dad in the picture? What if it's an IVF with a donor sperm or whatever else? And this Dr. Verney, like, he's a psychiatrist, very well respected, written all these books. He said it is like night and day between an IVF conceived baby and a naturally conceived baby. Now, I'm not saying that for people to beat themselves up, but what I am saying is to say that they're the same there's some real problems there. I brought this up in a recent interview. I flew out to Portland for a video studio show that somebody had invited me out for, and the host had asked me about something like this, and I had posed this same conjecture, and I saw her body language change a little bit, and I was like, ooh, like maybe I hit a sore spot. Maybe she had IVF or something, because I knew she had twins. And when we had a little pause, like a bio break, I said, hey, can I check in with you real quick? I sensed something shift for you when I had started speaking about IVF. And she said, yeah, it's just interesting what you said, because my twins were conceived through IVF, and then we spontaneously conceived a singleton shortly thereafter.
Wow.
And she's like, so first I'm thinking maybe I didn't really exhaust all of my options before the IVF because we conceived naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing she told me blew my mind. She said, there is like an auric difference. And this is not she's not like a Checky, like talking to people like that. She's really kind of grounded in her space. And not to say that we're not grounded. My point though is that she's not a person who speaks like that. I hadn't ever heard her say anything like that before. She said, there's like an auric difference between my twin girls and my little girl. She's like, I don't know what it is. There's like a difference in how they show up in the world. And she said, what you said about IVF actually made me really thoughtful. Like maybe that explains this difference I see in my children.
Interesting.
I find that to be very fascinating.
Wow.
Like I find that to be like, wow. So there is some important distinction. Does that mean that all babies born by IVF are like doomed or something? No, of course not. It also might mean that as parents, you might need to do a little bit more coddling of that little soul, because the journey was just a lot different. They weren't inside your body when the conception happened. Energetically, something is just different. With IVF, you get the sperm and the egg to meet. And then once it's gone through a couple divisions, then you implant it into the uterus. So there's a loss of a few days of that process that isn't happening inside your body. So anyways, I guess I just am introducing that as a means to not challenge people, but to really encourage people to just be a little bit curious about this. I do think that there are some hidden costs not financial costs, but hidden costs to the experience of getting pregnant, being pregnant, giving birth, postpartum, etc. And then, of course, 18 years of parenting in the very least. When we take this path that everybody makes it seem like this is just the easiest way to do it, versus maybe taking a little bit of extra time to improving egg quality, improving sperm quality, and really turning over every stone before you end up there.
Yeah, because like in the conversation around HPV that we have all the time, like in the conversation around any other, chronic illness or whatever, if you're trying to heal that, if you're trying to get pregnant naturally, all the things that you do for yourself are going to help you also long term. Because what we're talking about is providing yourself more nutrients, grounding yourself, balancing, finding, areas of stress that can be released, connecting more with your partner, all of these things, sleep, hydration, all of this. It's not just to get pregnant. It's not just to have a baby. It's also helping you the rest of your life. Yeah. So it's in your best interest to do this, whether you're going through IVF or not, whatever your journey looks like this is just like optimizing yourself as a human,
Yeah, totally. And, when it comes down to it, I think we have to consider that we carry these stories into this fertility journey. And I'm kind of speaking to you, Chase, here, but I think for both of you, given your backgrounds and how you were brought up, there could be something subconsciously playing out here in your subconscious. You're not even aware of this. That is playing out in ways that you wouldn't otherwise be able to identify if you didn't go back to your own origin story. And I originally developed this sort of concept when I was getting questions around men who were resistant to home birth. The woman's pregnant. Third trimester is happening. I want to have a home birth. And he digs his heels in and says, no, that's not safe. How do I convince my partner that home birth is safe? I can't convince you. But what might be a good starting point for this unpacking is for every man to go back and ask their mother and father, hopefully they're still alive, or somebody that was there, and have them tell you your birth story. And what tends to happen is, and when I reflect on my own birth story, I remember hearing, for whatever reason, I had this notion that it was terribly painful and traumatic to my mother to be pregnant, to get pregnant, to be pregnant, to have a baby that split me from front to back. And of course, I see this as unsafe because, Freud, of course, would love this.
Sure.
I harmed the most important person, the woman I loved most deeply. I caused her so much pain and suffering. And if there's anything I can do to save her from that, that's probably what I'm going to go to. And it's an unconscious or subconscious thing. And I think the same goes for this fertility journey. Maybe we can start engaging with the pregnancy and birth conversation preconception. And maybe that would unpack a lot of these unconscious notions or subconscious notions that we have around what this process means. And if we can then retell that story or reimagine that story with our parents, then perhaps that would actually remove some of the karmic or energetic barriers to conception in the first place.
Wow. That is so fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, I'm absolutely going to go interview my mom.
I
know a couple things like she actually didn't have a period for years leading up to getting pregnant with me. And
Chase was a miracle baby.
But that's about the extent of it. And I knew she loved cheeseburgers when she was pregnant. That's about it, which, that's a pretty shallow understanding of how it went. So it's definitely I'm talking to her tonight. I'm going to lean into this. This is really, really cool.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah. And if she only says negative things, then just receive that and be very open about it and say, oh, thanks, Mom, for sharing that. I didn't know that. What was it like to hold me for the first time? It sounds like it was so hard for you. What was it like to hold me? And then what happens with even the most closed off mother? They start remembering, they start going back into that space and they're like, oh, Chase, I was so happy to hold you and you smelled so funny. I'd never felt skin so soft. You were trying to breastfeed immediately. I mean, whatever, they're going to go back into that. They never forget that. And that will actually help to kind of shift energetically a couple degrees. It'll shift what this trajectory that you're on is going to look like. Because now you see it as wow, I brought so much joy and maybe even pleasure to my mother, who so desperately wanted to have me,
Yeah.
as opposed to whatever the opposite story could be.
Yeah.
I have every couple do this now, and there's some really cool stuff that happens.
Wow.
That's
That's awesome.
Yeah,
It's definitely happening.
looking forward to our conversation tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is so good. Are you currently working with clients, people? What is the scope of your clientele right now? Because I know you do a lot of different things and you've changed it multiple times. Where are you at right now as far as who you are working with?
I will work with anybody who needs some support. I have all these other skills and trainings that are complementary, but now sort of becoming a replacement for the pharmaceuticals and surgery that I became so good at. So most of my work can be done remotely. I do refer out to a lot of other practitioners who have skill sets that I simply don't have. And so when people decide they want to work with me, I do it on a donation basis now instead of a sliding scale. And so I used to charge $397 for 45 minutes. Now, if somebody needs some advice, you make a donation and we'll find a time to meet, and I can give you as much of myself as you're able to pay. So, and it's not like 20 minutes for this amount. Like, it doesn't work like that. It's just, sometimes I just end up spending 90 minutes with a person who can't afford it. I don't want anybody to feel like they can't work with me, because I feel like I get so much. I'm so grateful to be able to do this work. So people can find that at belovedholistics.com. Just submit a form, contact me on Instagram, Nathan Riley OBGYN. The other thing I'll say though, is that once you get pregnant, now there's some real work ahead of you. And so within the Born Free community, which is the complementary program to Clear and Free, at bornfreemethod.com, you can see what we do there. But I include a lot of my fertility workup process in that program. And when you're in the community, you can consult with me as many times, anytime, text, call, write me a letter, whatever. You can do it and I will respond, because now you're in the clan. And I know that you have so much of the background information from having done the pre-recorded content. So those are two ways that people can work with me, or just find me on Instagram, and I'm happy to help anybody that needs it.
Awesome. Yeah. And I can totally vouch for the Born Free course. I have gone through it and it was just mind blowing how much information you guys were able to pack into that program. And I'm going to be going through it again once I'm actually pregnant, because I went through it last year, and I learned so much, and I know you've been adding to it, and I'm really excited to go through a second time once I'm actually pregnant, and to check out the new information. But you guys, you're not going to find a greater pregnancy, birth, and labor postpartum resource than the Born Free program. Nathan created it alongside Sarah Rosser, who is a fantastic, super badass midwife. And you guys just have such a fun, down to earth, and very real way of teaching and explaining, and similar to here. But it's the best. And I cannot speak highly enough of it. So we'll have all the links in the show notes, of course. Reach out to Nathan on Instagram, send him an email, whatever you need to do. But I can vouch for how wonderful everything is.
Yeah.
That is a great compliment. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then someday when you guys are having a baby, you just let me know and I'll fly out there. Have a baby.
That'd be awesome. Yes.
We'll see.
We
Crossed.
will let you know. All right. Well, this was so amazing. Thank you.
Love you so much, man.
Thank you so much
Love you
for
too, guys.
You're just
I really
amazing.
do.
Yeah. We love
Really
you.
appreciate it. Thank you. That means a lot from you guys. I really do appreciate another opportunity to chat with you and see you. It's just too bad it's not in person. You guys are just so much fun.
I know. We're still trying to get you to move out here to California. Maybe Sedona. You want to move to Sedona with us?
Still on the list. Maybe. Yeah. There's a lot of like new age mystics out there. I'm sure I can find my people.
Yeah, for sure.
We might spend a little bit of time out there next year. So we'll keep you updated.
You guys want to talk about cum and balls? Anybody? No, just me. Okay. All right.
All right, you guys. Thank you for hanging out with us and listening. Send this episode to someone you love. If it resonated, check the show notes for all the associated links, and we will talk to you next time. Go spread some light. Okay, bye.
Thank you so much for listening.
If you enjoyed that, check out right over here for some more fun clips.
Oh, and you're going to want to subscribe.
Bye.